Miraculous. He's asking for something that had never been seen or done before. He asked for a miracle. And we see what happens in verse 29. Yes, come, Jesus said. Come on, Pete. I can't do it for you. Step out of the boat. Put your money where your mouth is, Peter. Come on, Peter. So he's calling Peter to step out. It's this invitation to trust him completely, to trust him fully. Jesus can't do it for him, but he's inviting Peter to step into this and completely trust him and step out in faith. And don't miss this, because I missed it until late last night when I was reading through my notes one last time and I had to jot it down. I missed it. God alone has the power to grant miracles. God alone had the power to do this. And for Jesus to say, yes, step out on the water, I will grant that to you. Jesus was identifying himself as God. In a religious system, in a religious society where that was unheard of, it would have been seen as blasphemy. Jesus does something unprecedented and he says, step out of the boat. I am here. I am is here. I am the Lord your God. Step out of the boat in faith. I am with you. You don't have to be afraid. And Jesus tells us the same thing here today. Trust me completely. Trust me fully. And I will do something unprecedented in your life. Now let's continue on. We see what happens. So Peter went over the side of the boat and he walked on the water toward Jesus. Whoa! Unprecedented, right? Completely never done before other than Jesus. Peter steps out of the boat. I wouldn't have had the courage to do that. I'm just being honest with you. I would not. I love the water. I love being on the lake, but if I'm out on the sea or the ocean, I'm not getting where I can't touch because I'm afraid of sharks. So if Jesus tells me to step out of the boat and walk to him, I'm probably not going to do it because I'm afraid. But Peter, in his courage, he steps out in faith and he walks on the water. And think about that for just a minute. Like he steps over the boat and he doesn't sink. And he's standing there. Can you imagine like what that would feel like as he takes a step and he's coming closer and closer to Jesus and he's walking on the water and he's getting pumped and the disciples are in the boat and they're like, dude, they're fist bumping, they're high-fiving, they're like, he's doing it, man. Check out Pete. He's walking on the water. I've never seen this before. You know, and Thomas is doubting. He's like, yeah, but he's probably going to sink. Like, he's going down, you know. Thomas is doubting. And Judas is probably over there taking bets, you know. He's got a side bet going like, I got 20. He's going down. No, he's going to make it to Jesus because he handles the money, right? So they're all just watching Peter as he steps out in faith, and they're watching a miracle happen. It's completely unprecedented. But something happens. Something happens when he steps out in faith. We continue on. In verse 30, but when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. Peter lost focus. He stepped out in faith. There were two things that Peter did. There were two things that Peter had to do to completely trust Jesus in that moment. Number one, he had to obey. And he did that. When Jesus said, yes, come, step out. He does. He just steps out in obedience. And when he stepped out in faith, he received the blessing. He received the miracle. He got to walk on water. Has Jesus spoken something impossible to you? Has he been speaking something into your life that you know you can't do without him, but with him and through him all things are possible? Has he spoken that into your life? And if he has, are you going to have the courage to step out in faith? Or are you going to stay in the boat and keep questioning, is it really you, Lord? Just wondering. It's just a question. So the first thing that he had to do was obey. And when Jesus calls us to trust in him, we've got to obey. Just listen to Jesus and do what he says. It's that simple. The second thing that he had to do was cry out to Jesus. He lost focus. He lost sight of Jesus. He began to focus on his storm. He began to focus on the surroundings and the wind and the waves and everything crashing around him, and he begins to sink, and he has to cry out to Jesus to save him. Now, a lot of people would say, well, he lost faith and he began to drown. He didn't have faith anymore, but I would disagree. I would say that he still had faith because he knew the one person that could save him. He still had faith that Jesus could save him from the storm. He just lost sight of the fact that Jesus was with him and would bring him through the storm. And I don't know about you, but that's where I live most of my life. I don't doubt that God's sovereign. I don't doubt that he's good. I don't doubt that he could save me from any storm that I would go through in my life. And if you're honest, I believe that's true of you as well. But where I struggle a lot of times is when I lose focus. And I begin to focus on my storm and my situation and my circumstances and the wind and the waves and all the noise gets so loud that I lose sight of Jesus and I feel like I'm drowning. And I cry out to God, God, help me. Jesus, save me. When I stepped into ministry almost 3 years ago, that's what it's like. Stepping out on faith. Like, it was scary. Man, some days I feel like I'm walking on water. Like God is blessing me and I'm right there, God, and I'm walking on water and we're killing it. And sometimes I lose sight of him and I begin to focus on the storm. And I feel like I'm drowning. And all I can do is cry out to Jesus. And what does he do? Every time, the same thing he does for Peter in verse 31. Jesus immediately reached out and he grabbed him. You have so little faith, Jesus said. Why did you doubt me? That's my story in ministry. It's part of my story. But what about your story? Your story may not be ministry. It may be something completely different. Maybe it's anxiety or depression. Maybe it's all this stuff with COVID has got your head spinning and you were doing good and you were trusting Jesus and you were walking on water. But when this thing hit and all the uncertainty, you begin to spiral down because you don't have all the answers and you need to cry out to Jesus. Maybe it's your job. Things were going great. You were climbing the ladder. You were making good money. Everything was awesome. You were walking on water. And COVID-19 hit. And you got laid off. And now you're sitting at home looking for a job. And you feel like you're drowning and you need to cry out to Jesus. Maybe it's your marriage. Or maybe it's your dating relationship. It was awesome at first. The honeymoon's awesome. And we're walking on water, Jesus, following you, God. You're blessing us. But you've gone through a rough patch. You've gone through some struggles. Life happened. And you feel like you're drowning. And you need to cry out to Jesus. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe you struggle with substance abuse. And you were doing good. And you walked away. And you're walking on water. But in a moment of weakness, you made a wrong decision. And you feel like you're drowning. Maybe it's a pornography addiction. You keep telling yourself you can beat it. You're not going to look at those things again. And for a while you're doing good and you're walking on the water. But the winds and the waves begin to come in a moment of weakness. You feel like you're drowning. And you need to cry out to Jesus and completely trust in him with all your heart to come and save you. So that's two things. Obey and cry out to Jesus. Those two things are required for us to fully trust in Jesus. And in verse 31, like I said, we see what happens. Jesus immediately reached out in his hand and he grabbed him and he said, you had so little faith. Jesus said, why did you doubt me? And I wrote this down. I want you guys to get this. Sometimes Jesus delivers us from the storm. And sometimes he brings us through the storm. But he will never abandon us in the storm. I want you guys to understand that today. Sometimes he takes us away from it. He pulls us right out of the storm. Sometimes he walks with us through the storm, but he will never abandon you or leave you in the storm. We just have to trust him. And I want to put something up here on the screen. And our faith is greater than our fear when we focus on Jesus. Somebody needs to write that down. Our faith is greater than our fear when we focus on Jesus. It's all about what we're focused on. When we're focused on him, we're walking on water. We're focused on the storm and the winds and the waves and the uncertainty, then our fear overtakes us. So it's about focus. We need to fix our eyes and fix our focus on Jesus. And something I want to point out in verse 31 there, Jesus reaches out his hand and he saves Peter and he says, you have so little faith, Jesus said. Why did you doubt me? I've always read that as Jesus rebuking him or kind of getting on to Peter a little bit, like, kind of shaming him, like, why did you doubt me, Peter? You got so little faith. You need to have more faith, Peter. But now when I read that, I see it as compassion. I see it as Jesus reaching out his hand and helping Peter back in the boat, and just so happy and overjoyed that he had enough faith to even step out on the water. Can you imagine what guts that took to step out in faith? And I think Jesus reaches down in compassion. He says, come on back in the boat. Here, Peter, let me help you up. Let me give you a hand. Pull you back in the boat. Listen, man, why did you doubt me? Pete, I got your back. You're my boy, Pete. I'm not going to let you drown. It's a voice of compassion and not condemnation from Jesus. Anytime we lose sight of him, anytime we lose focus and we feel like we're drowning and we cry out to him, don't expect God to come to you and beat you down. Expect him to come to you with a loving hand and open arms to welcome you back into fellowship with him. So why did Jesus allow Peter to sink in the first place? I mean, he is Jesus, right? He is God. Why did he send the disciples out by themselves on the boat? I mean, he could have gone with them. Or he could have just appeared to them in the boat rather than walking across the water. Why even go through all of this? Why did he go through such pain, and Peter struggling like that? I believe we find the answer in verses 32 and 33. When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped, and the disciples worshiped him. You really are the Son of God, they exclaimed. I believe that's our answer. He did it to grow their faith. Because up to this point, they had seen Jesus do some really cool miracles. And they had heard him say some really cool things. And they were following him. And he was gaining popularity and a following. But they didn't fully trust with all their heart that he was the Lord. And in this moment, he uses this to grow their faith. And they say, surely you are the Son of God. You are the Lord. I think of it like this. How many parents we got in the room? Raise your hand if you're a parent. Mom, dad, yeah. Anybody ever have to teach their kids to swim? Anybody? Hand up, teach their kids to swim? Yeah, it's so traumatic, isn't it? Like, it's awful. It's an awful thing to do. I mean, if we're being honest. Because for one, the child has to trust the parent completely. Like, we've got 3 kids, and we taught all 3 of our kids to swim, and some were easier than others. But there was one in particular that was really hard. And I'm not going to say her name because Ava gets embarrassed really easily and it would just kill her. But she was terrified of water. Now, she could swim in the shallow. Didn't bother her a bit. She could swim in the shallow. But as soon as she veered off to the deep end, panic, just straight panic, fear, the look of panic on her face, she just lost it. She would stop moving and just seize up and begin to sink. And so as a parent teaching her to swim, 2 things had to happen. Number 1, she had to understand completely and trust me completely. As her father, I was there for her, and I would never let her sink. I would never let her drown. I was there to save her, just like our Heavenly Father is when he's growing our faith. And we're learning to swim a little bit. We step out in the deep water. He's always there for us. But as the parent, as the father, you also have to realize sometimes you got to let them sink a little, or they'll never learn. They'll never grow in their faith. They'll never learn to swim unless you let them sink a little. So you take your hands out and they begin to kick a little bit. You see the panic and the fear, and you put your hands back in and you pull them up. And then you take your hands out and you let them kick a little longer until they get the hang of it. But your hands are always there to save them so they don't drown. And I think that's just a beautiful picture of how God sees us. Sometimes he calls us out on the water